Hello, loves. I'm Harry McEntire from Xenoblade Chronicles 3, The Last Kingdom, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, some other stuff, my Twitch channel, and you are here for the Points of Experience podcast, listening to it, watching it, however you're consuming it. Hi, hope you like it.
As you just heard, everybody, Harry McEntire, someone who I've been a deep fan of. The Last Kingdom has been a show that Allie and I have watched within the past year or 2 years, I guess, religiously. Like, we fell in love with it, and his performance as Ethelwald was one that really opened my eyes to how good performances can be with someone who was like me in a way. I saw a lot of myself in Harry, and it was a role that, not in the evil natures that he finds, spoiler alert, but someone that I related to as a performer in a role that I could or would play, and to see him do such great work was extremely inspiring for me, and the show is just unbelievably great. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And then to find that he was the voice of the main character in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. That game, go play it, please. It is so great. The performances are exceptional, and it's got a brand new DLC coming out, so it's a great time to catch up on that. Check it out. Harry's also worked extensively in TV. He was on shows like Episodes. My gosh, with Matt LeBlanc was a great show that I had watched. He also was in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. He had done tons of other roles, extensively worked in theater and things like Spring Awakening. We talk a lot about that. We talk about what his method is as a performer, dealing with the success at an early age, working on these prolific titles with actors who really say to you, you better show up and get ready to work. It was such a thrilling conversation at every moment. I was just constantly invested in every moment that he was speaking. His stories and journey is really inspiring, admiring, and one of vulnerable truth that I really appreciated him sharing. So stick around. I was going to say stick tight, but that's not at all what you would do, but you're going to hang tight. Make sure you like, follow, and subscribe. You do all those great things. Leave a review on whatever platform you are watching this on, and we've got Harry McEntire coming up on the Points of Experience podcast. Harry, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is an absolute pleasure. You're going to find out shortly as I probably talk a lot about these things, but I'm a huge fan, and obviously Xenoblade was a tremendous title that blew me away, and we'll get to that later, but there's other things along the way that I had known you were in, and I'm a huge Last Kingdom fan. I found that show through the pandemic, so there's so much that I want to talk about. I'll try and be as efficient as possible and respectful of your time, but I'm gonna gush over a lot of things. So thank you so much for doing this, and I'm just excited to dive in.
Mate, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me to do it. It's always nice to kind of talk about stuff, so very happy to be here.
Of course, and this is, you've done a lot of voiceover, but I feel like this has been like a newfound world for you in a way where you come from a background of doing this, a lot of television, working with, on these very prolific titles, but then you get the opportunities to work on these games where it opens up another stratosphere of working in this industry and connecting with fans and actually even using your instrument in a different way. So to see somebody like you, and I've seen you talk about this to some degree, but, on camera, you kind of work within what you've got. And then, in games, you get to kind of push yourself to a limit that you didn't really know. So to see you as an actor kind of just knowing all your different works and being like, okay, that person's got that quadrant available. That person's got that quadrant available. It's really impressive. And I really respect when people are hard workers and good at this craft and they take it very seriously. And I take you to be someone like that.
Oh, thank you, man. Well, yeah, I do. I've been doing it for kind of a reasonably long time, and I'm aware that we got no retirement age, so there are people who've been in the industry for like 70 years, but I've been in it since I was 17, and I'm 33 this year, so I've been doing it for almost half my life at this point. And I think my grounding, like my training, if you will, although I didn't train in any formal way, was in theatre. And in theatre, there particularly at the time at which I was coming through, which was kind of 2008, 2009, I was kind of able to be part of this really exciting kind of movement of new writing in the UK. And actually that gave you incredible flexibility. In a sense that quite rightly now, some of the parts that I played then I kind of wouldn't be considered for, because there's a kind of greater understanding of what stories are yours to tell and what stories are maybe left best to people who understand those experiences better. But at the time, you're kind of able to be incredibly flexible with your casting, with the kind of the energy of the characters that you're playing. And then you move into television and film, although film never really kind of took off for me in the same way that, relatively speaking, television did. And you start to work in a more kind of distilled space where a lot of the other stuff has kind of been burned off, and you're left with this quite kind of concentrated core of what your casting is. And that is sometimes amazing, sometimes immensely frustrating, because you have this kind of either accurate or potentially inaccurate sense of what you're capable of doing as an actor or an artist, however you want to convey yourself, and you're increasingly occupying this kind of relatively small space. Now, I was lucky that the small space I got put into tended to be sort of Machiavellian, quite intelligent, sort of darkly funny people. And that is a much better space than the person who stands next to the lead person and whispers in his ear, or a much more satisfying space creatively than the person who punches people in the head. Or, it's my kind of privileged situation was as a white actor as well. There's much greater flexibility of parts being written for me than there would be, like black actors my age who I know from friends of mine are sick of playing like drug dealers and rappers, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
But you're still in this kind of relatively narrow pocket. And the amazing thing about working in voice, and really that is, if you said to me you're never on TV again, but you get to have a voice career, I would bite your hand off for it. I love working in voice so much, with so much more than even I loved working in theatre, which was where I started. And the incredible thing has been with all the aesthetics taken away. As you said, you talked about use of your instrument and command of your instrument. It's up to you what you play now. Obviously, you still have to go through casting processes, but I'm sure you've been in the same situation where you get sent these kind of blank castings and they're like, would you like to audition for any of these 8 characters? Just put yourself on tape for the ones you think you could do. And you go, oh, wow. And the age range you're given is like 15 to 60. And you go, I'll try 4 of those.
Yeah.
And do you get them all? No. Do you get one of them? Very occasionally. But still, the opportunity to be flexible, to broaden your horizons as creative is so, so exciting. And the stuff that comes with it, so, we may end up talking about this, but for me, it's opened me up to Twitch. It's opened me up to just a sort of a different world. And it's not until you're in it, or certainly not until I was in it, and kind of living the reality of being a voice actor as opposed to a screen actor, I realized how much of a better fit it was for my personality as well.
That's so fascinating, and everything you said is so true, and it kind of the same thing happened for me in the same way, and I'm curious if this is how it was for you to some extent. I grew up very nerdy playing these video games. For me, this was like my life. I mean, this was like the room that I would dream of as a kid. Like, I would have a station to play video games and talk with my friends, and it sounds great, and it's really enjoyable, and the stories that I most... not that I would say that I wasn't interested in books and fantasy to that degree, but the idea of playing a video game where you are a part of the story, and it's like you get to, like, oh, these are my friends, like these are people I'm jiving with, and it's not just that kind of passive experience. That was my life, and it's rewarding in a way that when you work on film or you in the theater, it's just different. There's another element to it that you're enjoying. And for you, when you were growing up, were you interested in video games? Did you have that kind of nerdy sensibility? Was that kind of who you were as a kid?
Yeah, I think it absolutely was. I didn't have great access to video games as a kid. I had a Mega Drive. I had a secondhand Sega Mega Drive, and I used to play things like Road Rash, which is like which I still think might be one of the best games that's ever been made.
Yeah.
You know, and I had like Sonic and Sonic 2 and all those kind of platformy games. But for me, gaming, there were two strands to my kind of gaming journey. One was like Age of Empires and strategy games. I just I was a real history buff and remain someone who really enjoys learning about history, and I think I was talking with someone about this the other day. I think what I really love is storytelling, and for me, history is storytelling, understanding how we got to where we are, the mistakes we made. I mean, I've been watching stuff recently. There's this, his name escapes me now, but it's an amazing YouTube channel that does 2 to 3 minute explainers on certain historical events, and then longer form 10 minutes, and they're all these kind of really kind of dry, like dryly humorous, and they have this kind of very boxy animation style, and they're great. But you know, I'm kind of learning about you know, the fall of the Holy Roman Empire, and I'm learning about the French religious wars that I just had no idea about. And to me, the stuff that I'm kind of finding there, even the names of offices and the names of wars and the names of conflicts and treaties are so fantastical and so rich that to me, they're just great stories. And so I had a real love of Age of Empires. I used to play Civilization. There was a game called Pharaoh, which was like an Egyptian. I mean, they're not. I don't know if they're real-time strategy games. I don't even know what they
yeah, RTS for sure.
Great.
Age of Empires. Yeah.
Then there was one called Stronghold, which was an amazing kind of British-based. You had to sort of play this campaign, and it took you through the lands of England, and you had to go on sieges, and you also had to build. And you could build. What I used to really love doing was I would build scenarios, build maps, imagine the topography. And then you could kind of create the sense that in August of 1064, wolves would arrive, and you'd have to fight the wolves, and all that kind of stuff. I found really immersive and really magical because, as I say, it was stories. And then Pokemon Red came out, and the first thing I ever bought for myself I was going to say as a grown-up, I think I was 10, but I bought a Game Boy Color and Pokemon Red. And I remember the guy in the shop saying, you know, you're making this so much more expensive for yourself because you're buying a Game Boy Color and it's a black and white game. But I didn't care because I had one of those sort of semi-translucent ones where you could see the wires, and I just thought it was the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
And then I kind of got into, I mean, I never played because I was too socially nervous to go to a Games Workshop and play, but I collected Warhammer. I collected little soldiers and used to set those up and imagine battles. And I mean, even now, this is where I lose a lot of people. But even now, I play a lot of FIFA. I've never played FIFA online. I have no interest in playing against someone online. What I do is I create myself as a manager or a footballer that I admire as a manager. And I do all the press conferences out loud. And I imagine being on the training ground, and I'm in my, as I say, nearly my mid-30s, and I talk to my players out loud, and that's so everything's about story. And so now what I'm finding with the JRPG world, although tell me if that's, I've kind of heard recently that some people don't like that term and find it to be pejorative. Certainly not the way in which I'm using it, but perhaps I'll just say, you know, RPGs like Xenoblade and
sure.
Of that kind of ilk. But the incredible ability that games have to tell stories in a way that really, unless you're into Game of Thrones, where you have, I mean, how many, even with Thrones, I can't remember how many seasons they have.
8 seasons, 7 or 8
seasons,
yeah.
And maybe, 15 eps a season, 10 eps a season? So let's say it's, you know, I mean, my maths is not good enough to do 8 times 15. Is it? It might be 123. Is that nonsense? That sounds like nonsense.
Sounds about right, yeah.
But that's your kind of amount of hours. Well, you know, 120 hours is a playthrough of Xenoblade that doesn't even 100% the game.
I know.
You know, that's just pursuing your main story. And the thing I realized is, you know, I'm a Lord of the Rings. I'm a kind of Lord of the Rings kid, really. I just love the Tolkien stuff, and I watch the films back to back every year, once a year. We
My
watch the
fiance and
films.
I too. Same.
Yeah, it's the best thing. It's our favorite day of the year. And I feel like I know every shot of those films.
Yeah.
However, I could watch them a 1,000 times more. I'm never going to be Frodo. But when I turn on, and I'm not very good at games, genuinely I'm not very good at games. But when I turn on The Witcher 3, I am Geralt of Rivia.
Yeah.
And Geralt's journey is only the journey I choose for him to have. And the diverging points in the story, whether or not I can't remember what her name is, that spellcaster who you can choose to have an intimate moment with down by a lake and then kill her. They're only choices that exist because of my sensibilities and my kind of the direction I wanted the story to go.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of immersion and culpability you have for your characters, your protagonists in games, and the connection you feel with them as the player, which just to me completely outstrips the connection you have with a character on screen.
Yeah.
That's been the kind of really remarkable thing, and it accounts for why people have such a strength of feeling for games. Players of games, fans of series have such a strength of feeling for them because there really isn't anything like it.
No, it's a very unique experience, and I think it's hard to understand or even relate it to something unless you experience it yourself. I come from a time, I think we're basically the same age, and, when I was a kid, people would make fun of you if you said you were a gamer. That was like, you were a nerd, and it was like, get away from here, nerd. And now to see something like a show like The Last of Us come out, and people are like, this story is insane, this is amazing, it's not just a zombie show, there's like rich character relationships and things going on, and it's like, yeah, we've been experiencing these stories for years, and now people are finally getting hip to like, oh, that's what you guys were doing when you were a kid. You were playing all these games and learning about these stories, because even from an RPG sense, I mean, I grew up playing RPGs religiously, and that was where I learned a lot of grammar and literature and words and relationships. I mean, a game that I'm very obsessed with that I played as a kid was called Suikoden. It was a Japanese role-playing game, and it was about like you would collect or you would recruit like 108 different characters to join your team, and based off these Chinese novels. And each character had like a different, backstory and history, and you would like learn so much about just the way that they spoke. And I'm like, that's how I was learning, in addition to like Lord of the Rings and fantasy stuff. But it was just such a unique experience, and I'm really glad. It's a little bittersweet to know that now there's like the true revenge of the nerd, where like now the nerdy people are the cool people, because it's like I went through the time where I was getting made fun of daily because of the stuff that I was into and I liked. But it's really great to finally see the acknowledgement of how rich these stories can be, and I'm with you. I think that storytelling, being an actor, is the part that I love the most. I don't, to a degree, and this is why in my background, I got a lot into like producing. I was producing a lot of indie film because if there was a story that I liked and I knew needed to be told, or I just wanted to be a part of the storytelling process, I didn't care what I was doing. You want me to act and then go run and move the water bottles out of the shot? I'll do it. Like I'm here to get the story told. So I really understand the love for storytelling. That's how I kind of describe myself to people. And I'm curious for you, when did you notice that bone or that itch of storytelling that translated into wanting to become a performer? Was there a moment in your childhood? And you grew up in South London, correct?
South of London, about
just
half an hour south of the South London suburbs, in a place called Surrey, which is a kind of very leafy sort of. Lots of people's, my dad didn't, but lots of people's dads commuted into London. Like, it's that kind of territory.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I'm the youngest in my family, and there's a 12-year gap between me and the next youngest. So my mum was a very experienced mum by the time she had me, and I was immensely indulged in terms of imaginative play and recreating bits of books that I loved, recreating I was obsessed with the I can't remember when it actually came out. It might have been in the 40s, maybe even earlier than that. There was a Robin Hood that Errol Flynn did.
Sure.
And I was obsessed with it. And one of my favourite things, incidentally, about it is it was one of those early films where they were able to do colour. And so all of Robin Hood's merry men, there are these mad sequences in which they're about to ambush a group of Guy of Gisborne's knights, and they're all hiding in the trees. But because everyone was so excited by colour, they are all in the brightest colours you've ever... Like, it's the worst camouflage ever, and yet these knights are just completely oblivious. But my mum used to make me Robin Hood costumes. Will Scarlet, who's not in that film, but I loved the character Will Scarlet, she would make me other costumes. I used to kind of dress up a lot, and I was really exacting in terms of there's a fight between spoilers. There's a fight in the 1948 Robin Hood between Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne at the end of the film, and I knew the fight. And my dad, who was a chef and was working like 6 day weeks, like 18 hours a day, in his downtime was forced to try and recreate, each attack and each parry accurately, and I was devastated if he didn't take it seriously enough. But I loved telling stories. I used to love writing stories and reading, and I still kind of, in the last kind of few years, have kind of got back to reading. I know that sounds like an unusual thing to say, but I didn't kind of read for a while.
Yeah.
But I think I loved two things, honestly, and that there are two things that made me want to be an actor. One was I loved stories, and the other was actually I really loved people telling me I was good at something. And one of those was a great reason to get into it, and one of those actually was a super toxic reason to get into it. And it took me until my mid-20s, maybe even kind of turning 30 to go, external validation is not a good enough reason for your career, especially when you're not necessarily... And what I want to make really clear is when I say, you're not telling the stories you want to tell, I'm not referring to The Last Kingdom or kind of other jobs that I've had, because I'm not in any sense saying I was poorly served by my career, because I really wasn't. But when all you're kind of relying on is people used to, like my grandpa used to get me to stand up on a chair at family events and sing stuff from Les Miserables, and everyone used to tell me how brilliant I was. That's not a good enough reason 25 years later to still be doing it. So I had a kind of reckoning where I had to figure out what was more important to me. Was it telling stories, or was it being praised? And kind of the realization that actually what I wanted to do was tell stories is what's allowed me now to have the career that I've got, where I'm much less concerned. I mean, I was never very good at social media, and I'm still not very good at it. But it's very easy in a show where people have got 200,000 followers on Instagram, and I've got like 15,000, to be like, what am I doing wrong, and why aren't I? And actually, that is noise. That is completely useless. What's important is, what stories do you want to tell? And now the stories I'm telling, I really love, and the rest of it, I don't really care about. And that's part of a journey that I think lots of creatives go on. And if there was a shortcut to it, it would be marvelous, but occasionally you have to walk through the weeds to find the path you want to be on. So that was kind of my 20s, really, was just walking through the weeds.
And that's but it's a really real thing you're talking about, I think, because there's so much that's tied to a career in the entertainment industry, where looking at followers or looking at what type of presence you have outside of your work can do to bring you more work. So anybody who's interested in a career like this, it's hard to just say, like, okay, when you're not in it and you're not in the thick of it and you're not working, to be like, okay, how does me not having more followers equate to me not working more? It seems like the people who have a lot of those things, that's what makes them work more. So it creates that kind of lust for, I need to become social media famous, and that'll make me a famous actor. And then I'll tell stories. It's like that becomes the last thing that you're really looking to do, is tell the story. It's like everything's set up in the wrong way. So I truly understand that it's very real today. And it's the danger of the time that we're in from a performance perspective, because it's like, what are the things we're prioritizing when we do see social media stars getting big roles in these stories, and it's not necessarily a merit of their acting capabilities or talent. So it's very real, and it's thank you for sharing that. I think it's a very hard thing to kind of to reckon with, especially when you it's easy to just get enveloped in the success that you had and being like, I'm in all these shows and things, and why am I actually doing this? What do I love about it? It sounds like if you were singing and performing as a kid, I saw that you had done musicals in the theater and stuff. Is that where your performance in the theater started, or did it start from doing plays, and how did that all come about? Was it like your mom said, you should try auditioning, I heard you can do that? How did that origin of all the auditioning and getting into productions happen?
Well, I did have a very supportive family, but I also had a very, I had a nice low, class is a really tough thing over here to define, and we can get really bound up in it. I had a lower middle class upbringing. I had maybe an upper working class upbringing, but in a very middle class area. So how I talk and where I grew up is not necessarily indicative actually of the kind of childhood I had, but still, there were very few barriers to me doing what I wanted to do. But what my parents did instill me with was this absolutely blind encouragement without ever pushing. They as far as they were concerned, if acting or performing or whatever it was what I wanted to do, that was fine with them. That was absolutely marvelous. The one thing they did suggest I do was stay in what we call A-levels, so sort of 17, 18. You do some what at the time were optional exams before you go to a sort of university. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to go to a specialized performing arts college, and they suggested that it might be a really good idea for me to have literally anything tangible to fall back on. So I did do that, and but in terms of encouragement from them, when I was 5, maybe, I went to the little. And side note about this, you get a lot of people who ask how you got into it, and particularly when someone in a kind of more of a not the conversation we're having now, but when someone in more of a fan context, or you meet someone, your mum knows someone, and they say, "Oh, Jackie's boy wants to do it. Would you have a chat with Jackie's boy?" And you go, "I'll talk with Jackie's boy, sure." And the implication is always, can you tell me, the tangible steps that you took so that they can be replicated?
Sure.
And the brilliant and terrible thing about the acting industry is I can tell you all the steps. It is impossible for you to replicate them because acting or creativity in general, but let's just talk about acting because it's all I know. It has the potential to be genuinely meritocratic.
Yeah.
And it also has the potential to just be mired in nepotism and mired in luck and placement and timing. And so for me, when I'm 5, I start going to the little village next to the relatively small town where I grow up, and I'm doing Saturday morning, being one of the munchkins in Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
11 years later, those ladies who ran that bought a small local agency which predominantly dealt with children, like child performers. I was doing an amateur production of a very bloody Shakespeare play called Titus Andronicus in a hut out the back in a sports centre car park. And they happened to come and see it, and happened to say to me, "Hey, not seen you for a while, would you like to come and audition for our agency?" I said, "Yes, obviously." So I signed with them in the last year of this 2-year educational thing that my parents had suggested I do, which it turns out was a bad time to do that. And from them, I had a thank God, unaired Nickelodeon pilot in which I I can only assume the reason it was unaired is because my performance corroded the film.
Oh, God.
Like it was a wretched bit of work, but I learned a huge amount. I was also late for my first ever day as an actor because my alarms didn't go off, and they called me at like 10 in the morning. And as an actor, you know how late 10 o'clock is, being like, Harry, are you at any point coming to work?
I've had the same thing happen to me.
Oh God, it was I was just like, this is it. This is my career over. But I did some work in my last year of what's my A-level, so high school.
Real quick, though, was that a Nickelodeon pilot that was for something that was going to be shot in London, or did you come to the States to do that?
No, it was in the UK. It was, I shot it in Leeds in the north of England.
Okay.
And again, I'd never been away from home by myself. I'd never stayed in a hotel alone. I was like 17 in a month. You know, it was like I was really green.
Wow,
And then I kind of really fortuitously got the lead in a BBC drama with Imelda Staunton in it, who plays Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter.
Sure.
And that was a 90-minute thing, and I did that. And then I did I had about 3 lines in a radio play with Tom Hiddleston, I think. I can't really remember him, and I'm sure he wouldn't remember me. And then I finished my A-levels, and I was like, well, I want to go drama school, but I want to go to drama school. But I started school a little bit early. So by the time I finished, I was only 17. And typically you get to drama school sort of 18, 19. And I looked very young. I was playing 13-year-olds at this point. And all the advice from people around me was, you know, give yourself a year and go and actually live a little bit. So I thought, well, I've got an agent. I might as well. I'll go and get a job. So I went and got a job cleaning the offices of the police union. And then the Hoover on my back gave me an allergy attack, so instead I served breakfasts. So that job lasted a day, and then I got an audition because, as I said, this agency I'd signed with had a really good reputation for young actors, children performers, and there was a big casting drive for a original British cast of what at the time was a very successful musical on Broadway called Spring Awakening.
Yep.
And they wanted unknowns. Well, I was that. And fortunately, the pull of this, as I say, tiny agency that operated out of a very small village near the small town where I grew up meant that the casting director came to see just their clients. So me and my friend Ed from the year above me at school were both in Spring Awakening. And my friend Luke and me, Luke and Ed had played Enjolras, Javert and Marius respectively in our local youth theatre in the school's version of Les Mis. Luke was last 3 for Melchior, ended up originating the role of Moses in The Prince of Egypt on the West End. And then Ed and I were in Spring Awakening. So it was blind luck that led me there.
Yeah.
And then Spring Awakening did very well in its original theatre. And then we moved to the West End and we moved to a very big theatre which we couldn't fill. And after a couple of months we closed. But for those 2 months it was the best shop window in London, really. And what that allowed me to do was move into new writing in theatre. And I stayed there, working in different theatres in London and Manchester for about a year and a half. And then my brilliant agent said, I want to get you some more TV. And so they just did. And I
sign that off. Okay,
yeah,
sure.
Red order. So I did a TV show, a TV drama over here, which did quite well. And then I immediately got my first and only actually lead in a really interesting indie film that I think was probably produced 10 years before anyone was talking about the things that it was about, because it was all about gender identity. And I just lived this charmed life, really. I mean, in the first... From 2008 to 2014, the longest I was ever between jobs without knowing I had a job to go to was 2 weeks. And I went from job to job to job, and that was brilliant, and then ultimately terrifying, because people would say to me, you will spend some time out of work, and I would say, yeah, no, I know. And in my head, I'm thinking, you fool, I'm a generational talent. I shan't spend any time out of work. I'm Mark Rylance, but young. And of course I'm not. But all the time
Oh,
you're
come
working, you're
on.
able to. I'm not Mark Rylance.
Well,
but
listen,
young.
Mark Rylance is one of
I
my
wish
favorite
I was.
actors of all time. But
he's the best.
Yeah.
He's the best.
To put a pin real quick, because I want to talk about something, just because you touched upon it before, and before we get too far from this, but I appreciate you mentioning kind of the blind luck leading you to a lot of these opportunities, and you just it so happened to be the theater that you went to as a kid. They just so happened to open up an agency, and then these casting offices just so happen. So there's a lot of factors that are completely out of your control that are leading you to these opportunities. But the thing that's not accounted for by my understanding is that you had to have had some ounce of talent that was allowing you to capitalize on these opportunities as a kid.
Sure. Born with pipes, sure, but yes, I think it did. I mean, obviously, I'd be lying if I didn't say I don't have some natural aptitude for it. That would just be false, like grotesque false modesty.
Yeah,
and I have a really healthy ego. It's only become healthy recently. It was probably an unhealthy ego for a long time, but I have a pretty good sense of my worth and my range and what I think I'm capable of, and I didn't know how to be in the industry if I didn't think I could not only succeed but really excel.
Okay.
And that's sometimes a really great thing because it means my self-belief, while it gets knocked by negativity, it's pretty unshakable. But more than anything now, what I try to foster in myself is a kind of growth mindset about learning and developing. And I'm less kind of concerned with what people think these days.
Sure.
And I just think that's a virtue of being in my 30s. I just care so much less than I used to. But the other thing that was a factor was I did actually work really hard. And I was told, I remember sitting in the stalls for when we were doing the tech rehearsals for Spring Awakening. So this would have been maybe January 2009. And the musical supervisor saying, the reason you got this job is because you wanted it so much. I mean, we won't get too into the weeds with this particular anecdote, but essentially, the last stage of Spring Awakening auditions was a workshop, a 7-day workshop at a theatre. I mean, actually, it's pretty horrendous now when you think about it. But I was so new, I had no idea this is not how you do things. We were all in a big room, and there was 2 or 3 of us for each part. And they'd go, right, we're going to sing this song. You sing that, you sing that, you sing that, you sing that. And you'd stand up and you'd watch the person next to you and they'd sing it. And then you'd sit down and it was this weird like boot camp where you were seeing the people who you were competing with and going into a room to work with. And every time they do something and they miss a note, you'd be like, yes. But I, just before that session, just before that round of the auditions had been told, you're on standby, but we don't think it's going to be you. So my mum had taken me to a city called Guildford to commiserate with me about not getting this job that I desperately wanted, and I was using my birthday money to buy a pair of shoes. And I got a phone call saying, actually, we might have changed our minds. Do you want to come in for the workshop? This was maybe 3 hours into the workshop, so I don't know what happened in between. I don't know who screwed up. But they brought me in. And what that really did is it really focused me. So Spring Awakening was the kind of job where I loved it very much. But if I say to you, the average age of the cast was about 20, and it was pretty much everyone's first job, you can imagine the fraught, frantic, hypersexualized musical theatre energy of that company and that production. And I've got some really great friends from it still. But when everyone else was celebrating their first day in the workshop by going and having a drink, I went back to my room, went over my notes, woke up 2 hours before the workshop started, did a full vocal warm-up, and came in ready to work. And other people were like, oh, can we do a warm-up before we start? And then they're being read the riot act of, you should do this before, you should arrive to work, ready to work. And I'd already kind of done it. And I think I was very driven. So I was driven, and I was lucky, and I was talented on a kind of basic level. I had decent raw materials. But yes, so much of it is circumstance.
Yeah.
And even the way in which I moved into voice work was the writers. I'd gone in and done some work on Assassin's Creed Valhalla through a casting. And I was playing these little parts. And then I got something from my voice agent. And they were like, you've been offered like a more work in Valhalla. I was like, oh, cool. It wasn't called Valhalla back then. I didn't actually know what it was. And I looked at this. They were like, I think it's actually like a proper part. And I was like, oh, amazing. And I looked at it and I started to read it. And I was reading it and said, does this sound like Ethelwald, which is my character in Last Kingdom, to you? I was like, this sounds a lot like... And then at the bottom, the character reference said Ethelwald from The Last Kingdom, but without the edge. And it turned out that the writers of Valhalla were kind of enjoyed The Last Kingdom. In fact, Magnus Brunn, who plays Knut in Last Kingdom, is the male Eivor. And they had written this character based on Ethelwald, and then were like, who are we going to get to do it? And they were like, hang on, we've already got Ethelwald, so we just ask him to do it. And so even that is fortuitous.
Yeah.
And you know, the rest of the stuff that I've done in games, I like to think I've done off my own back, but still, you know, I got in the door through circumstance.
Yeah, again. And I think that happens for a lot of actors. I think it'd be very rare to find somebody who didn't find themselves in another job in a very long career that didn't come from saying, oh, they knew them from this thing, or they had worked with so-and-so who said they were great. I feel like that happens a lot in this industry. A lot of people talk, and a lot of people like working with people who they know. And if they idolize a performance they've seen, they sometimes try to seek out those performers to get them involved in their projects. But and so in Spring Awakening too, which was one of my favorite musicals growing up. I come from a very our timelines of life are very similar, and that was something that I had been auditioning for in regional theaters in New Jersey when I was growing up. But I am not as talented vocally, so thankfully I did not get those parts when I was auditioning. But it sounds like you had some natural ability to sing, and you had been doing that in your life. At what point or where in your life, if you had not gone to drama school, where did your understanding character, or at least how you were going to break down scripts and performance and all of the things that I think, and this is something I've talked about a lot on this podcast, and it's great when I hear people who don't have the traditional story of I went to Yale or I went to RADA or whatever it is for people here in the States. When we don't have that traditional conservatory methodology of learning performance. But for you, when I see a lot of your performances, they have such deep nuance. It's hard for me as another performer to say, like, what are they doing? Because it is so nuanced. You know, when you see nuance like that and you see somebody so in the moment, it's hard to not be curious of what the method is, or what at least the game plan is walking into some of these jobs or to that moment on set, to like, how are you allowing for such freedom to be so nuanced? Did you have a certain moment where you were either reading about acting or like just watching other performers or watching movies and trying to emulate? What became the, from a dramatic standpoint or even comedic standpoint, you know, straight acting for you to say, this is how I need to train to do this for yourself?
I think it has a sort of 3-part answer. Number one is that I think there's an extent to which if you have a decent understanding of psychology, and I mean amateur psychology, God, I couldn't talk to you about psychology, but an understanding of the way people think and why they do the things they do. I think I'm relatively emotionally perceptive. And I think that's very useful. And, you know, I remember hearing a story. I worked with a director who worked with Judi Dench, and he said he came to her she was staring in the corner at rehearsals, sort of doing this sort of scrunchy thing with her face and sort of cycling through all these emotions. And he went, are you all right? Is everything okay? And she went, oh yeah, I'm just trying to figure out which face I'm going to do. And I kind of love that. But I think there were a couple of jumping off points for me. One was in the first ever play I did. So when we were directed in Spring Awakening, we were directed very much in the way I'd been directed at school and in youth theatre, which was, okay, you come on here, you stand here, you look, you do a thing, and you kind of mimic almost, and you try to inhabit it a little bit. But by and large, you're sort of working by numbers. And there was an amazing actor called Sian Thomas who played all the adult female parts in Spring Awakening. And she was the first person who ever used to say to me, I used to go to her dressing room and ask for advice on what could I do in the scene tonight? How could I do? I mean, I'm sure I must have driven her insane. What could I do tonight? What could I try? And she always used to say, you're an artist. And she was the first person who'd ever called me that. And I would she would give me a point of focus in a scene. She would give me something to try, whether it was delaying something for a moment or whether it was thinking about something else or engaging with something on an emotional level. And that was kind of training in a sense. And then the first time I ever did a play, I did a really brilliant play called Punk Rock by a writer called Simon Stevens. And the first day was what a lot of first days are in theatre, where... And I'd never been in a professional play before. I'd done a musical, but it was very different. I turned up fully off book, knowing all my lines for the entire play, because I thought that was what you were meant to do. And very quickly realised no one else had done that, so I pretended to read it from the script for 2 weeks. And actually that uncovered a flaw, which I'll talk about in a moment. But we were reading the script, we read the whole thing through, so the producer and the artistic director of the theatre could hear, and the designer was there, and blah, 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 blah. And then they all go away and you start working through the script. As a company, there were, I think, maybe 7 people in the cast, maybe 8. And we start working on the script. And the director at some point within the kind of first couple of hours turned to me, and my character did something, said something, arrived on stage. And we were just sat around the table, and she said, "What do you think about that, Harry?" And I thought, I had no idea I was supposed to think anything. I thought I walked on, said all the letters in the right order, in the words, and then I left. And that was the first time someone had asked me about the why in performance. Why are you doing the things you're doing? And why is always so much more important than how. How is irrelevant. How takes care of itself. But why is the only question you ever really need to ask. And then I realised that I had this incredible opportunity to sit in rooms with people who've been doing it for 3 times longer than me and shut up and listen and watch and go, why is that good? And why does that work? And what are they doing there? And ask questions. And a play I did relatively soon after that one I'm referring to, I was the second youngest in the cast, and the oldest in the cast I think was 72. And there were about 15 people in the play. In fact, one of them was Tanya Moody, who I've literally just seen has just got a job has just been confirmed in the new Rings of Power, which is amazing. She's absolutely lovely. But I had all these amazing actors, and I just sat there and tried to figure out how they were doing things. And then 2014 came around, which was, as I said, the period where I suddenly was out of work. I was doing a TV show called Episodes, and I thought I was returning for season 4 for them, which would have been my 3rd season. And then they suddenly said, actually, we've written your character out. And I panicked. I blind panicked. And I completely changed the way in which I started working on scripts. I'd been taught a technique called uniting or eventing, which is essentially breaking down scripts into kind of collective energy, chunks of collective energy. Every time something changes for everyone in the space, there's a new unit, and you kind of give that a name, and it helps you understand what I always think of as like the flow of a river. That while it might be described as, your scene starts here and it ends here, and it's very easy to act in straight lines and think in straight lines and go, oh, okay, I know where I start, I know where I finish, so I'll just pick the most direct route to that.
Yeah.
And then when you think about the way a river flows, it might be described as flowing north, but ultimately it flows east, it flows south for a while, then it flows northwest-west, but generally speaking it flows north. And what uniting and eventing does, without getting too deeply into it, for me, it allows me to understand all the turns of the river and all the different views that I've suddenly got, all the different perspectives on things. I've been taught how to do that by a combination of 2 directors, one called Joe Murphy, who I did a play with in 2012, and another called Lindsay Turner, who I worked with in 2013. And I'd seen the way they'd broken down scripts. And I just asked people what they did. I learned about this thing called actioning, which sometimes is useful, sometimes isn't. I learned about various bits of things just by osmosis. And when I got this audition to play Alfred the Great in The Last Kingdom, my agent, who I'd been with since Spring Awakening, who knew me very well and knew all the buttons motivationally to push with me, said, I want you to know there's an audition and they don't think you can do it. They don't think you're capable of this character. They think you're just a comedy actor, because it was the same casting team as had worked on episodes.
Okay.
And so I was filled with righteous rage, decided I was going to show the world just how much of an artist I could be. And so actually, I worked incredibly hard on this script. It was the first time I'd written things down on a script, really, deep text work, and thought about it and knew it inside out. And knew I probably wasn't going to get the part because I was 10 years too young. But it changed the way in which I approached my work. And then off the back of that, they said, actually, we don't think you're right for Alfred, to which my response was, you're correct. But there's this other character called Ethelwald that we'd like you to audition for. And I remember getting the script and going, that's me. I'm going to get that. And I've thought that before and been right. I've thought that before and been wrong.
Sure.
And they're the really devastating ones, actually. When you think, and you can still be correct, when you think, you know what, no one can do this like me. No one can play this part like me. And no one can. I mean, no one can, because we're all our own unique, we all have a unique perspective on things.
Sure.
But that was a role where I went, I'm going to get this. And I think I can do a really good job. And that was down to, the fact I got it, I think was down to this new way of working where I suddenly went, I think I need some technique here. As Frankenstein as it was, and incomplete as it will have been from a deep follower of Stanislavski or a genuine follower of Brecht or Meisner or Lee Strasberg or Uta Hagen or whoever it might be, I had my own approach, and it kind of worked.
I think that's really brilliant, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying in the beginning. There's not this one size fits all, follow this process to end up in a career that is successful. There's so many other factors that are involved in a career in this industry, but also for you, whatever you had done, it allowed you to find a role that you felt was really resonated with you, albeit maybe even close to you in some regards. I have to imagine that there's some parts of you, even just from talking to you now, that has a little bit of those Ethelwald sensibilities where, you find ways to find the joke or be a little bit of that fool to a degree. I when I watch that show, and this is a great time to start talking about it, I mean, this show, I was a diehard fan of Game of Thrones. I had read a lot of the books I read up to like book 3, and then I started watching the show, and that became, it was very hard to read those books, but I really enjoyed them. They're a lot to get through. And that was a really, it was a great show for me for the things that I liked. And I found the things that I didn't like about Game of Thrones, I found everything in The Last Kingdom that it had so many. The performances were so good. The writing was exceptional. There was just so much about it. I remember the first episode I watched, and I'm curious about the whole BBC Netflix thing, if this had a part of it. The first episode I watched, I didn't know if it was like a live reenactment thing. Like, there's a first couple of frames where it seemed a little bit like, the retelling moment of like an old war or something. But everyone kept saying to watch this show. I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And then as it got through and as different characters, like your character, got introduced, I just kept seeing all these amazing performances. I mean, and Ethelwald for me was just like someone who I resonated with so much. This person who had to find humor and use intellect rather than brawn and brute strength. You're not Uhtred. You really related to kind of what I loved in Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. You found ways of scheming behind the scenes and using people in the ways that would benefit you to get ultimately what the main character of the show was also trying to get. It's like we were both promised these things from our birth and we don't have them, and there's so many great scenes that you have where you're literally saying that you're like, this is our fate. And I wanted to talk about one of these moments where your character goes through such a great journey that I've loved. You see from being that fool that kind of even lesser than some of the bastards that are thrown away and kind of just
100%
kept around because you have to be, you're like a set piece to Alfred. But, as we get towards the later parts of the season, we get to the moment where you are forced to kind of reconcile with Alfred for your crimes, for what you've done. And that, for me, was one of those moments in your performance that I had loved up until that moment. But to see the world crumble for you, So it's like you have an insane arc in this like one episode where you go from you thinking you're going to be on top of the world, everything you've wanted is going to be fulfilled, to, oh shit, my own uncle is about to punish me in such a crude way, to you then accepting this disfigurement that you're left with and finding strength within your punishment. I know that's a lot right there to unpack, but it was such a brilliant moment in your performance, and to see you, it's when you say, like, I know why, when you say, I think I'm going to get this part, did those things come naturally when you're getting those scripts, and you're like, I know how I'm going to do this? Did it terrify you? Was it inspiring, exciting to get to work on that type of material? Like, can you distill a little bit of that whole moment with playing Ethelwald in that episode or those scenes?
I think that what those moments and those scenes represented was the culmination of the kind of high point of my hypothesis of what the character was going to be when I got that original breakdown in 2014. And I remember saying at the time, to those closest to me, that if I get the chance to take him where I think he could go, he could be so exciting.
Yeah.
And to me, that was the transcending of the bratty child, and then the transcending of the clown, which he is those things, and he certainly begins as those things, to a deeply narcissistic Machiavellian antagonist who has lost sight of his morals and maybe even his faith, and is just dogged in his pursuit of his own success and his own sort of understanding of what he's entitled to. I loved playing him so much, and I think what I'm really grateful for is that, particularly in Series 2 is a really tricky series for me, because I'm not really doing anything on paper. You could kind of, apart from a point where I take Uhtred to see what I believe is a dead man rising from his grave, there's not really anything that I'm the engine behind. And the character at that point could have devolved into a sort of edgeless, sort of flabby joke. Without any drive, without any motivation, just someone to occasionally be told to shut up in rooms while other people were doing things. And what the writers did so brilliantly was there was one amazing scene which got cut, and I'm really gutted it got cut. I've spoken about this before, but I think it's always worth repeating. There's a period when we meet Ethelwald in the beginning of season 2. He's really tried to do the right thing. He's sitting on the Witten. He's not raising armies. He's not trying to kill anyone. He's trying to be taken seriously as a politician and fulfill his role. And he's being completely sidelined by Alfred. And so when he's sent north to an incredibly dangerous mission to accompany Uhtred, who is a complete loose cannon, and told you're there to make sure that he doesn't go off the rails, it's an impossible task. And there's a fantastic scene that was written between Ethelwald and Beocca. And Ian Hart, who plays Beocca, is a real mentor of mine, a great friend, someone who I hold in the highest regard. And we had this great scene together that was written where I say to Beocca, I think Uhtred and Ragnar, because we've met up with Ragnar at this point, are going to go north and try and kill Kiartan and retake Darnholm. And Beocca says, well, what are you going to do about that? And I say, well, really, it's my job to stop them doing it. So if I go with them, I'm a traitor and I'm going to die. And if I leave now, I'm a traitor and I'll probably be killed. And I think Alfred expects me to run and just hopes I'm going to die. And Beocca says, so what are you going to do then? And Ethelwald says something like, I'm going to disappoint him and I'm going to live for a very long time. I'm going to outlive Alfred. And to me, that then kind of gives the reasoning, which we sort of, so that scene was like in a script and then out of a script and then in a script and then out of a script, and we never quite, the schedule never allowed us to actually shoot it. But to me, that is his justification for everything he does from that point on. He has tried being the good person and it hasn't worked, and so he goes, you know what, I'm never going to do anything while Alfred's king, but one day he's not going to be around, and when that happens, I'm going to make sure everything is in order. And as flawed as the execution of the plan was, he's really close in season 3. He's really close. He's making alliances. I mean, the thing I love about that scene for me that you've spoken about in the trial scene is the high point for me of my I don't necessarily mean on an artistic level, but like on a character level, and in my memory of it, it's the high point of my work on that show. I loved doing that scene so much. I was working with David, who plays Alfred. David is, again, a great actor and a great person, and I admired David for a long time before I got to work with him. And it was always difficult to work with David in the best way possible, because you have to match him. Because he's that good, and so he's leg day at the gym. Like, you're going to come out sore, but I was getting to work with him, and what I love is even as Alfred goes away to consider Ethelwald's fate, after I've constructed this web of lies and deceit and half-truths and self-aggrandizing rewriting of history, even as he's going away to consider my fate, I'm still turning to people and trying to sow yet more seeds of dissent within the court.
I know.
And it's such a brilliant thing. And then, as you say, I'm suddenly condemned. The stuff without the eye, generally speaking, I look back on with a touch of disappointment on a technical level, because I didn't realise that if I kept my eye line as low as I did, you lose my one good eye a lot of the time. And I look back and all I can see is the bits where I think, I wish I just raised my eye line ever so slightly and kept my face more alive. But that was not that I needed rewarding, because the work and the people, and also like the financial remuneration, was reward enough for being on that show. But the end of Series 3 was the reward for me. And there was stuff happening in that show that is not in the books. The killing of Ragnar is not in the books. The blinding is not in the books. And so every time these two scripts would come out as a pair, whether that was 5 or 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10, I couldn't believe my luck. I felt like I kept pulling aces and just going, this is the bet. This is what I've been hoping for. Very, very lucky to get to do that with it, and to see a character through from the beginning to the end. You don't get to do that very often in TV. You're commissioned for a series, and if you're lucky, you get another one, and if you're really lucky, you might get a third. But I've played characters where I thought this could go somewhere, and then it just doesn't. And to actually see him through to his fruition was pretty amazing.
What a gift on so many levels, and it sounds like the writers, even with that scene that didn't get shot, it gives you such perspective to just even consume that and fuel the vehicle that's going on for yourself to say, what can I do and bring to this character?
And that scene still happened. We just never saw it.
Yeah.
But that scene still happened. Like, as far as I'm concerned,
Sure.
they had that conversation because it motivates everything. You take that scene away, you take away all the motivation for me. So that scene still happened.
I mean, you talk about working with David and being forced to, like what you said, it's the most difficult in any way. How did that manifest for you in terms of performing? Did it just be like, was it to you saying yourself like, okay, I did all my homework and now I need to just like shut the brain off and just be present? Was that like kind of the most difficult moment for you, or the most challenging as an actor, just to be able to be like, everything I need is right in front of me and it's up to my instrument at this point in the homework I did to just react in the way that it should?
That's exactly what it is. It's a little bit like, and I don't know, I'm going to do some guesswork here. When you see really, really great table tennis players and one person is on the attack and the other person is just putting the ball back over the net. That's all they can do because there's such ferocity of energy and intent coming towards them. I fancy that at that point, they're not really thinking about what they're doing. They're just relaxed enough that their body knows what to do.
Yeah.
And that's what that scene was like. That I prepped the crap out of it. I really had. I'd worked really hard at that scene and everything surrounding it, and I really knew where I was, and I really knew what he was trying to do. And I always prep a scene as if I'm the lead, as if the scene is only about my journey. And then you get into the space with other people, and you realize, okay, so these 5 or 6 moments that I had selfishly planned for me, and selfish in this sense is not a pejorative term, that I selfishly planned for me, I'm going to keep a couple of those, because actually those moments are really important for them. And so I know where I am, I know what I'm intending to do. And then you go, now I'm just going to listen to everything that's happening and trust that my body or whatever it is, or my brain knows what I'm doing. And so it's a really, really like thrilling and freeing thing. It's a little bit like, I used to have this sensation when I was on stage where you'd take a beat, or there would be a moment of silence in the middle of a monologue, and I'd have this sort of out-of-body experience where I'd think, I could wait for as long as I wanted and everyone's here with me. And in those moments, I would almost feel like, there was that thing that Michael Jackson used to do, where he would lean very far forward over his feet and wouldn't fall over. I'd feel like I could do that. I'd feel like I could kind of mess with the laws of nature a bit, which I know sounds insane and egotistical and egomaniacal, but what it wasn't about controlling other people. It was just about an incredible like feeling of solidity around me, that I just knew things were going well. I knew I could make choices that I knew I was about to make choices that I hadn't planned on making, but they were going to work. And that happened maybe 6 times in my career. But one of the days was that. Where it just came together.
Wow.
And we kind of ran it all as one scene. So we ran the interrogation. Out went David and Eliza, and I can't actually recall who else was up there. And then may well have been Bioka. And then I have my moment with Sigebrit where I'm trying to sow rebellion, and then they come back in. And then we played the sentencing, and we played the whole thing continuous. And it was just the best. It was just the best. If I could go back and do one day of my career again, I'd probably do that.
Wow. I mean, I appreciate the performances like that so much, because as an actor, those are the moments that you pick out that inspire you, and you're like, that's why you're doing it. Those moments and again, you give credit to your scene partner sometimes too. You were talking about having those out of body experiences. I don't know if I've ever talked about this on this show. I had because of the times of this pandemic that we experienced the last 3 years, working in person with a lot of people over that time was far and few. And I had an audition for a mocap thing, and it was a callback. And I was working with another performer. It was the first time in a while that I had been like allowed to work in person with someone. Forget on camera stuff. I mean, that wasn't even happening. And I wound up doing this performance. It was down to like me and 2 other people. Ultimately, at the end of this, I didn't get it. But I had such a rewarding experience, and I laid so much out. It was like a cathartic, it was more for me than it was for anybody else there. I literally laid it bare, and I felt so great. And I said, this is very well not right for what they're looking for. But god damn, if it doesn't like affect somebody in this room, then I got to get out of this business, because the credit to having a great scene partner being there to reward you. And again, I ultimately didn't get the part, but it's one of my favorite performances of the past few years that I've had, because it was so freeing for me, and I got to work on it with multiple times. And the studio has since called me back in for a lot of other different things, and that's kind of the win in this career. Totally. Is to do that. If you don't mind, I would love to jump to a little bit of Xenoblade Chronicles if you have a moment,
sure.
because
that
is a game that I was a fan. I mean, I played Xenogears when I was a kid, and I was obviously, these type of games have been a huge part of my life. They've shaped who I am in more ways than one. Like, all of my sensibilities are derived from these type of games and these characters where I feel like I am being seen in some way. And your character, Noah, in Xenoblade is... it's like your character has such great, again, another performance where you see such great moments of this story hit me. I'm going to jump around a bit here before I get to your question here. But this story hit me in so many different ways where it really, like, especially in this time right now where it's like movie scenes happening in this game. There are like full on, like, I felt like I watched like episodes of a TV series, like, at a time where these characters are going through things and talking about this world and, short lifespans and living and why are we fighting? And then ultimately having somebody say, you guys are fighting the wrong person. These are not the people who are doing this to you. And then people start fighting again. Like, these moments that are happening in this game, and to see your character as kind of this central figure who is leading this group of people, trying to unite people, trying to find further meaning in the world, trying to protect the people that they care about, and then also being forced with moments to be like, I remember... I think Lance says, like, you better not hold us back right now. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to hold you guys back right now, And to see your performance in that way go through this insane journey. This game, more than, like, really any other game that I've experienced, and I've played some freaking great games in the past year. We talk about The Witcher. We talk about, even Assassin's Creed, all these games. But from an RPG perspective of this kind, it goes everywhere. And for you as a performer being in this, what is, I think you could probably relate to this, being in the protagonist position, which I've been in, and a lot of people here knowing, oftentimes those moments are pretty kind of straightforward to a degree as the protagonist. It's like, I'm going to be the hero, I'm going to do the heroic thing, I'm going to look out for my friends, and I'm going to stand up for what's right and what's good. But for you to have these moments where it's really kind of, again, nuanced and finding the vulnerability or finding the anger and the rage in what this character seems to be really righteous and noble. What was that like for you to be, did you have to find moments for yourself where you were like, I am going to interpret this in this way and find something that I'm resonating with to bring that to life? Like, what was that whole experience to finding those little nitty gritty nuanced moments that I really believe make this game a standout in terms of the voice performances?
Oh, thank you. I think to very briefly talk about when you were saying it was like episodes of TV shows, mm-hmm. I remember saying at one point, we were doing this great big, it might have even been stuff from end of chapter 5. I remember saying, sorry, when does this happen? when is this scene happening? And they said, in the middle of the fight. And I couldn't believe that. I was staggered by, that when you do Assassin's Creed, or you take something like The Witcher, you have there's a little cutscene as you arrive at your objective, and someone goes, fresh tracks, and they go, looks like it. And they go, we should keep going, and they keep going, and yet here we are in Xenoblade, ruminating on the nature of identity and loss and war and love for 40 minutes during a battle. I couldn't believe the breadth and the intensity of the storytelling. I couldn't believe how brave the writing is. And I know that, stopping someone from dropping a bomb is brave. Like, everything's relative, but the bravery of the writing, there's no other kind of word that I've got for it. And just the confidence of going, no, this will hold. Dramatically, this will hold. And that's what people are here for. Mm. And my work in that game was the most complete and varied and broad spectrum of emotions I've ever kind of got to play, ever. And I think what I really loved is I've never, due to many things, not least of them aesthetics, I've never played a protagonist on screen. I've never played a hero on screen because I don't look right for heroes. But I can sound like one. And not only is he not just a hero, he's a complex hero. And he has moments of frailty, and he has moments of weakness, and he has moments of anger, and he has moments... He does a lot of learning, like a huge amount of learning. And so many protagonists kind of come out fully formed, and they don't really go on journeys, they don't really shift from where they started. And I am... What I kind of, again, really love about video games in general is, generally speaking, when you work on them, you start at the beginning and you finish at the end. And so you go on the journey with the character. And so the first time you're experiencing something is the first time you're experiencing something. And if you can get if you can get a grip on them early doors, I feel like you're just in this position then where if you've got a good team around you of people who you trust, and we had a great team, you're in their hands as much as they're in yours. And there's this kind of synergy of intent between you and the creatives working on the game, and you go, this just seems to fit. This just seems to make sense. And I don't think... I mean, I'm sure there were moments in the recording process when I couldn't get it. Tonally, I was kind of missing it. But generally speaking, it just sat really well with me. The whole thing sat well. It was genuinely just like... It was such a joy. The whole process was such a joy. And, I mean, I suppose I haven't really answered your question in terms of how do you deal with those darker moments, but they just happen.
Yeah.
And you just jump on the train and you stay on it for as long as you can. You just hold on. And it was great.
Again, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and you have to just be willing and open and trust a lot of stuff. Trust yourself, trust the writing, trust that you were picked for this job for a certain reason, and that you have the skill to take it to where it needs to go. And
some aptitude.
Yeah. And that trust is important, but it's also... Because I think about a lot of these titles, especially as someone who goes out for a lot of similar things, and it's like there's a handful of people who could have been put in these positions for different roles. What roles that I've done, a role like Noah, there's various people who, for whatever reason, could have been given that role. But when you see a certain person do something and you say that is a unique thing, especially in the world of dubbing, where it's very technical and oftentimes challenging to find those really nuanced moments when you have all these bumpers that are preventing you from going so far outside the lines. I mean, like you say, you're watching a scene happen, and it's not you for the first time interpreting how that scene happens. It's okay, I have to interpret how this scene is happening for this character that I'm watching, find my version of that within those guidelines, and then still find that nuance. So when I see somebody making those choices like that you made in this game, it's a whole other layer of admiration that I have, because I know how difficult it is sometimes when you're forced to hit those certain markers and follow along the guideline that's kind of presented for you, and still make it really rich, and on every moment know that person they're in it. It's sometimes hard to be in it. Sometimes it's an aid, but sometimes it can be, for me, I've experienced a hindrance. So I praise those type of moments, and that's why I'm always glad when I see games that across the board have those type of performances and actors. It's kind of kudos to the casting, too, to find the people and saying, like, that person can take this to where it needs to go. So
thank you.
Yeah.
It's I've done quite a lot of dubbing of foreign language stuff. And I didn't realize how much I'd love it until I started doing it. So the All Quiet on the Western Front that's done really well recently, I'm one of the characters in that, and there were a couple of TV series in German and some German stuff and some Swedish and some Israeli stuff and I think some Turkish stuff.
Yeah.
But there's an amazing thing that happens when you're dealing with a pre-existing blueprint, is that it's a little bit like understudying someone and getting one night to do it. You can't screw the rhythm too much because everyone else is relying on you to stay relatively true. Yeah. And so obviously, in terms of games, often you're almost like understudying the developer, understudying the animator, understudying the writer, and you're like, this is the window, as you say, in which I have to operate. But how I get there, and it kind of almost comes back to that thing I was talking about a while ago about those turns in the river, and understanding the little kind of movements that you can make while heading in the right direction. As you go, actually, there's everything in between point A and point Z is up to me. As long as I hit A and Z, we're kind of okay. And that's what's really interesting, and that's what's really challenging. I think that's what's so thrilling about working on games is, and you know, and kind of dubbing stuff in general, is the technical constraints of it, like you touched on. It's deeply technical and very creative at the same time. And it's very unusual to have both of those things coexisting, or at least trying to create peaceful coexistence between those things.
Yeah, it's for anybody listening who's interested in this type of work, it's you can come from the theater, you can come from TV and film and stuff, but the second you walk into a recording studio for specifically a game that you're dubbing, you're presented with a whole other set of technicalities that you like. How can you replicate those in theater and TV and film? Hitting your mark, maybe, I guess, is kind of the most relatable thing.
Yeah.
You know, I have to land here and be at this distance from the camera because that's where the director is telling me to. But for games and dubbing, very specifically, it's such a. I have found a lot of joy in doing that, and I kind of relish in making it my own more than anything, because I know that there's a great work that's been done from the origination, oftentimes the Japanese or whatever language that the content originated in, but to find your unique performance that is still true, like you're saying, like an understudy, that still has very similar resemblance, is one of the most rewarding things when those things get praised. And I mean, universally, Xenoblade has been being praised. Like, it's the performances is what people keep talking about, and I'm just so excited for that. This is becoming a game where you're seeing all these DLC entries, and I have to imagine you're excited to play the new one that's coming up. I know I am. And just even with that teaser, I mean, I won't get into this too much, but like, did that teaser just kind of like, it was so short and like fragmented, but it also kind of just punched you in the face at the same time. It was like, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it, it was like, hey, guess what, fucker, this is what you're about to get into. You know what I mean? There's that kind of how you felt. You were like, wait, what?
Yeah, I mean, I think is the teaser itself something like 35 seconds long? It's and yet there are like 40-minute video essays that exist of people just being like, shit, have you? Is that, could they? And I've been part of, you know, Last Kingdom, you know, was something where we have a great fan base for the Last Kingdom, incredibly loyal. The Xenoblade fan response has been, I've had great fan response. I haven't always had, like, you know, sometimes you have great fan response, sometimes you have great critical response. We kind of had both. And that is, I'm glad I'm doing this now. You know, actually, funnily enough, another thing that I did that had great fan and critical response was Spring Awakening. And, you know, we had barriers at stage door and people telling us how amazing we were. And we also won, like, I think it won 3 Oliviers. And we had all that kind of stuff. But I was sort of too young, too new to appreciate it. I was like, oh, that's great. But of course, that's what I'll do forever. And now going, no, it isn't. That isn't what I'll do forever. So this is a really amazing opportunity. I am beyond delighted to be part of it. And I am tremendously, I always think humbled is a terrible word, because I don't think you can really be humbled by people telling you you're great and that the work is great. If you do think that, you have a peculiar understanding of humility, I think.
I agree.
I am incredibly glad for the response it's had, and I'm very grateful for the generosity of spirit with which, you know, whether it's just the response on social media or the fact that I Twitch stream myself playing the game and hundreds of people turn up and go, don't worry, I also fell off that thing 15 times, has just been amazing. It's just been amazing. And I'm so looking forward to the new DLC. I can't wait to play it and experience it. And it's just, my appetite to do more games is so ferocious at the moment. Like, it's been a universally brilliant experience. There have been no downsides to this experience. It's been brilliant.
I'm so happy for you, and I'm excited to see the more of the. I can't see a reason why everybody wouldn't want to be having it. Although this industry doesn't necessarily work in that way, which is kind of brilliant in itself. It's like I have to show up to every audition and kick ass, and show people why I'm meant for this role. And I have no doubt that you will be doing that. Seeing what you're capable of in Xenoblade is again just impressed me on another level, and it's really instilled this. Admiration I have for your work, and I just really can't wait to see whatever the next version of this is for you in the world of video games, because I really cherish the work of actors who take video games seriously, because it had such an effect. I mean, it's why I do what I do in the way that I do it, because it was such a part of my life growing up, even before games had voice acting. But then to see a whole, like, completely removed artistic community now brought into the storytelling part of games and saying, we care about this too, and we want to make sure that this story is told just as well as Lord of the Rings, as, The Wire, insert any acclaimed series or movie. So when I see actors and artists that are brought onto these things, specifically video games, and like bearing their soul and killing it, I just have such a respect and admiration again for people who do that. So thank you, and just so excited for this whole game, and for anything more that they decide to give us with it. I'm here for it. I've taken so much of your time. I would love to end on one thing that we ask all of our guests here, even though you've given us a plenty of experiences you've had in your life, but something we ask, and it doesn't have to be related to the industry. It can be, but if it isn't, even better. Is there an experience you've had in your life, again, not whether as an actor, a performer, or not, that kind of left an imprint on you, that changed you in a way, or you learned a lesson from, that you think that people would really benefit from hearing? I've talked about this one 100 times on this podcast, but even for me, it was like being the first owner of my own animal changed me in profound ways, and taught me so much about life and responsibility that I couldn't imagine my life without having animal companionship. Is there something similar, different, the first thing that comes to your mind, an experience that you had either being with someone or being told something, or something happening to you that really just left an imprint on you, that sharing this advice or this situation people would benefit from?
I think I'll maybe trigger warning this slightly for depression, or by trigger warning slightly, I mean fully trigger warning for depression, in case anyone doesn't want to hear about that sort of thing. But I had a period of depression from sort of 2018, 2019. And I think I actually had it for a lot longer than I realized. And what it really, and I'm very well now, and I've been very well for a long time. But it was an extremely difficult thing to go through. And I think that what it gave me, and I kind of made the choice to consciously talk about it, not because I believe I can be at the forefront of removing stigma, because I think we're going that way anyway, but people find comfort with kind of mental health in all kinds of places. Although I would say, if anyone listening or watching is struggling with stuff, I'm not the person to come and talk to about it. The person to go and talk to about it are the people in your life that you love the most, and medical professionals. As much as I would like to help, I won't be able to. But what it gave me, among the many things it gave me and the many things I learned about myself, is that I think part of what made me really unhappy was, in my late 20s, I was holding myself to a version of life that I'd picked for myself at 17 or 18. And the idea of kind of self-flagellating, the idea that my career at 28 would have been seen as a failure to my 17, 18-year-old self. And the things that were important to me and the things I was doing were not the high ideals I had for myself. And what I realized, without getting too into everything, what I realized was, we think about ambition in creative industries in a very, very narrow way. We think about ambition being the pursuit exclusively of the personal, the kind of deification of our own idea of ourselves. Everything in my life as an actor, everything in my life as a human being had to be sacrificed on the altar of me as an actor. All the people I cared about, the relationships I formed, the way I spent my money, the way I spent my time, where I chose to live, how I chose to interact with the world. It all was in service of this idea of what I should be wanting. And what I realized was, and actually this was the catalyst for my move into, my move away from schooling and my move into voice work, was the things I'd wanted had changed. And that wasn't because I wasn't ambitious anymore. It was because my ambition was now directed in different places. I'm very fortunate that I'm, married to someone I love very much. I cared more about that than I do about me. I want to be a really great friend. I want to be a really great husband. I want to be a really great son, and maybe one day, if I'm fortunate enough, I want to be a really great parent. I want to be a really present father if I ever have children. And that doesn't mean I'm less ambitious as a person. It means the things that used to be really important to me are less important to me. And an understanding that we don't stand still, and that our aims when we're X age not being the same as our aims where we currently are, is not an indication of failure, it's an indication of growth. And if I'd recognized that that was growth and self-love quicker than I did, I might have had an easier time getting through it. And then on a very, very surface level, I discovered Dungeons and Dragons in that period. And I now play Dungeons and Dragons once a week, once a fortnight, have done for 5 years. It is genuinely one of the great joys of my life. It's creative, it's collaborative, it's storytelling. It brings me into contact with people in my life who I really love and who I want to see more. And I think it is tremendous for people in our industry, where often your creativity is shaped by other people, to have a blank page and go, do what you want. So yeah, without wishing to get too heavy, he said, having got heavy, those were the things that I really experienced.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And that's so important right now, and especially for people in this industry where I hate to get like, it's very easy for people to say like, well, you're actors and you get to perform and you get to do all these things, like, how are you not happy? It's a very real thing to experience this very weird dance of being in a public figure, to for lack of a better way of putting it, and having people talking about you when you're not present, and to have expectations of your career with people who you don't interact with daily, and to speak with family, and to have like what am I going to see you on? Like all these expectations of being a performer and the way that that affects you, and especially from a young age. I mean, I've had people on here started out very young, have talked similarly about it, and the way that can affect you when you get into an industry and you find success from a very early age. And I don't think there's a rule book on how to manage any of that. So I commend you for where you are, and thank you for sharing and talking about this stuff, which I find very important right now, especially for performers. And therapy and counsel, I think, has been some of the best things I've experienced in my life. People have seen great results with doing that as well. So whatever you need to do and whoever you need to talk to, thank you for expressing that. And on the notes of Dungeons and Dragons, similarly, I've found Magic the Gathering, which I've been playing and doing drafts of. I'm trying to get in. I'm meaning to get into Magic the Gathering. Dude, this is the new thing that I'm trying. That I want to get into Magic the Gathering. Let me know, man. I've been built. In my spare time, I'm sitting here. I've got cards littered throughout my thing. I'm making commander decks. But similarly with Dungeons and Dragons, and what a great way for artists to be able to perform when they're not, right? This is all, this cupboard behind me, that is literally all Dungeons and Dragons. And actually, you can't see down, maybe you can see down there. Yeah, the beginning of that shelf, you can see at the bottom, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 9 Dungeons and Dragons book, my DM screen, my character sheets, my wife's character sheets, and my journal as a DM, and all my notes. Oh my God, so fantastic. It's the best, man. Escape while you can. I'm really happy for you that you're finding these things that have been bringing you such joy in a way that you maybe at a younger age wouldn't have thought as much. So I'm so happy for you, and I want to make sure I plug this. I don't know, have you done it yet? Have you done your Streamly signing yet? I know that it said somewhere that you were doing that.
I haven't.
Great.
No. That is on the 7th of May at 6 p.m. UK time. I'm pretty sure it's that. I can check. But yeah, so I'm going to be doing that, and actually the response to that has been really generous and lovely and full of excitement.
Yes.
So I'm really hoping that's going to be something that people enjoy. Let me find it.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is. Yeah, I was. Oh my gosh, I was right.
There you go.
Sunday the 7th of May at 6 p.m. UK time. I'm going to be on Streamily for the first time.
Wow! So make sure everybody goes and checks that out. That link will be also in the description, and everything. And follow you on social media. I know we talked about a little bit of that life, but if you want to know more information and updates on when similar things may or may not happen, I believe we will put those as well in the description. Harry, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute treat. I could sit here and talk to you for hours upon hours about this stuff. Are you excited about the Last Kingdom movie? I believe that comes out pretty soon too.
Of course, Seven Kings Must Die comes out in April, I think, or maybe May. I don't know. I'm dead.
Yeah.
But you know that's gonna be great. I'm obviously still very close with a lot of that cast. They had an amazing time working on it. I think it's brilliant that Netflix and Carnival, the production company that make it, have given the story the end it deserves, the fans what they were hoping for. I haven't seen it, but I'm very excited to see
Amazing.
it. Yeah.
Amazing. Harry, everybody, thank you so much for coming on. It has been an absolute treat. More continued success for you in your life, your world, but especially in video games. I can't wait to see more of you pop up. Maybe we'll be in a similar title or a same title at one day.
That would be great. That would be great.
But really, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I loved it.
Thank you. Take care, buddy. I truly and honestly mean it when that was everything I had hoped for and imagined. I was such a fan of The Last Kingdom during the pandemic. It really, it's weird. Television, movies, and games and all these things, they've been and as I'm sure for a lot of you, it's like the comfort when things get dark or hard. It's something you can rely on to be there and to give you enjoyment. And The Last Kingdom was that for me. I found the show in, not to get, because it wasn't to the degree of like it was a really bad time for me, but it was just, I was really struggling to find things in my life during the pandemic that I was like that were bringing me joy, and I felt like everything that I loved and cared about was being taken away from me in more ways than one, literal and figuratively. And The Last Kingdom was something Allie and I would sit down and watch, and we were so excited about it. And we were able to binge everything through because everything had been released at this time, and I'm kind of glad we found it in the way, but we made it a ritualized thing. Like once or twice a week we would sit down and watch The Last Kingdom, and it really gave us something to look forward to. And I know that sounds cheesy and stupid, but it was. And Harry's performance, again, was something that, as a performer for me, I really saw a lot of what I see in myself in that character. Not in the evil things that he had done, but in the type of person and the type of performer that would book that role. I saw a lot of myself, being an underdog in more ways than one, being someone who's I don't know. I just saw a lot of similarities between Harry and I, and getting to talk with him was an absolute treat. Playing Xenoblade Chronicles and all of that was just so inspiring as well. I really enjoyed that game, and if you guys haven't played it, I highly recommend you do so. Or even just like watch the cutscenes as a movie. It's probably like 20 hours long, but it's so worth it. The story is so rich and really relatable to the times that we're in. Harry is really, excuse me, he's really fantastic, really fantastic. And you'll get to see some sides of his performance that, without spoilers, I think you'll really enjoy. I won't say more than that. And the DLC is coming out soon, so there's even that to look forward to. Also, I was a fan of him in Episodes. That was a show that I watched at a period in time that I was a really big fan of. We didn't talk about it, but he did to an extent. Really another funny role to see him perform in. So everyone check out his Streamly. We will link that in the description. Make sure you guys like, follow, subscribe, all that great stuff, so our videos can get seen by more people similar to you. As always, it's been a blast. Next week, we'll be having more for you. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye!